So I go to the airport and they just say that I've been rejected by the British government. And then about 20 minutes later, that Times article that you mentioned, Piers, comes out. And it says because I criticize Israel in the wrong ways. Over 60% of Americans are critical of Israel. Will we all be banned from the UK?
Question. Yeah, but they didn't.
If there's a gang of white people,
did they? Because of people like
shut
you.
up and let me
didn't arrest
finish.
them.
If there's people, shut up and let me finish.
What you're about to watch is one of the most uncomfortable debates Piers Morgan has hosted in a long time. And not because anyone lost their temper, because nobody could. This one was different. Cenk Uygur, founder of the Young Turks, one of the biggest names in progressive media, flew to the airport in Los Angeles to board a flight to London. He'd been invited to speak at Oxford University, appear at South by Southwest London, and debate live in Piers Morgan's own studio, and they just turned him around at the gate. No official reason, no appeal, no warning. Just, you're not allowed in. Now Piers has had hundreds of guests on this show. Politicians, world leaders, firebrands from every side, and most of them get on a plane, land in London, and sit across from him. That's how it works. But Cenk Uygur couldn't even get on the plane. And the reason, according to a Times of London report that dropped almost the exact minute Cenk got the news, was his criticism of Israel. Now Piers also invited a pro-Israel commentator named Shabbos Kestenbaum, the man Cenk was supposed to debate in person, to join virtually. And what happened next is the part that nobody expected. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so let's break it down. So I go to the airport and they just say that I've been rejected by the British government and I'm not allowed to enter and hence I can't board the plane. They don't give any stated reason. Then about 20 minutes later, that Times article that you mentioned, Piers, comes out and it says because I criticize Israel in the wrong ways. Now, I don't know if the British government is going to put out a list of the acceptable ways to criticize Israel and the unacceptable ways to criticize Israel. That might be helpful because apparently we're going to need it. Over 60% of Americans are critical of Israel. Will we all be banned from the UK? Should everyone be careful about traveling to the United Kingdom because they might ruin your plans at the end if a different government is unsatisfied with you? Can they put out a list of things you're not allowed to say about Israel? And what's amazing is that you're allowed to say anything you want about the United Kingdom or about America or any other country. And they said the only thing they could grasp at, because I've never said anything anti-Semitic because I don't believe that. In fact, I believe the opposite. And it is that they said that I said that America is controlled by Israel, the Congress is, because they're the top donor in this election, in this last election cycle. Well, that is empirically true. That is a fact. So are facts anti-Semitic now? Are news people not allowed to deliver facts to people? And if you say, hey, someone who is deeply anti-Semitic says the Jews are terrible and it's their fault and Hitler's good, etc., is in the same camp as a guy who says, no, this has nothing to do with Jewish people. In fact, 63% of Jewish Americans are opposed to the current Israeli government. And I make that distinction on the Young Turks almost every day.
You made it on this show regularly,
and if you put us in the same category, well, you know, you're destroying the idea of combating actual bigotry. It's almost like pulling a Jussie Smollett on a national level and saying we don't care. And it's also deeply ironic to say that we're going to ban you for criticizing Israel by saying that our governments are controlled by Israel.
The other point I read in the Times piece actually involved directly this show, because the Times said the decision to ban you was also based on some appearances on Uncensored, in which he dismissed evidence relating to grooming gangs in towns such as Rotherham, where official inquiries have identified an estimated 1,400 victims. Well, let's take a look at the clip we think they're talking about.
And then they go, it's the Muslims. I mean, it's almost comical. It's comical. And then we're talking about, grooming gangs going after kids or whatever. Oh, that comes out just as everyone's talking about the Epstein files and how a bunch of pro-Israeli figures raped American girls. Oh, it's the Muslims. It's the Muslims. So next time you hear it's the Muslims, I guarantee you that it's Israeli propaganda trying to divert you from something that's in the news now.
Can you address it?
Can you shut up and let me address it?
Pause here for a second, because this is where the whole debate quietly shifted gears and most people watching in real time probably didn't even notice it. Up to this point, the conversation was about free speech, about a government banning someone from entering a country for their opinions. And on that point, Piers, Cenk, and even Shabbos, who disagrees with Cenk on almost everything, were all basically in agreement. The ban was wrong. But then Piers introduced something nobody saw coming. A second reason the Times gave for the ban. Cenk's comments about grooming gangs. And here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because Piers actually played the clip, right there on air. And what the clip showed was the exact opposite of what the British government reportedly claimed. Cenk didn't deny the grooming gangs existed. He said, and this is on tape, "I'm sure they do exist." So now you have a situation where a government has apparently given a newspaper a reason to justify banning someone, and that reason is demonstrably, provably false, on video. And that's the moment Shabbos, who came on this show to argue against Cenk on Israel, had to pause, because even he couldn't defend that. What happens next is where both of them stop agreeing, and the real argument finally starts.
Can you address it without mentioning Israel? Or can you address grooming gangs?
No, because that's the whole reason
No.
we're having this conversation.
Brilliant,
Because your
brilliant.
Israeli
Okay.
buddies wanted a distraction from the Epstein files. That's why they threw this garbage into the media. So
Mate,
now let me
Piers
address
just
it
explained
in an
to you.
adult way.
Piers just explained to you that that's been going
Will
on for
you
30
shut
years.
up and let me address
It's been
it?
going on for 30
You're
years.
asking me a question and I'll answer it. You're asking me a question and I'll answer it. This is super easy. Why don't you arrest everyone who's committed a crime? So if Pakistani grooming gangs exist, and I'm sure they do, then arrest them. Where's the question?
Yeah, but they didn't.
If there's
They
a gang
didn't
of white
arrest them,
people,
did they? Because of people like
shut
you.
up and let
They
me
didn't arrest
finish.
them.
If there's people, shut up and let me finish. So if there's a white gang of people who are raping people, arrest them. If there's a bunch of super powerful people who are raping American girls, arrest them.
Now, again, people can disagree with you, agree with you, whatever, right? The reality of the grooming gang scandal was that it went on over several decades. It was covered up. It involved predominantly Pakistani British Muslim men abusing young white English girls. That was what happened, and many of them eventually got brought to justice and put in prison, but not before a gigantic cover-up went on, and that is indisputable and was a disgusting scandal which shamed my country. However, nothing that you've said about that. I mean, look, I would contest and I would argue with you that I've not seen clear evidence of any concerted Israeli campaign to hide the Epstein scandal thing around re-inflaming the Muslim grooming gang scandal, because to me they're two totally different things, and the grooming scandal continues to make news because of developments involving it. So I would say that you're wrong about that, Cenk, but it doesn't really matter whether you're wrong about it or not. You are perfectly entitled to express that opinion and to express that suspicion, and people on the panel can argue with you, disagree with you, or agree with you. The idea that again, as the Times reports, was one of the reasons apparently the British government used to ban you from coming to my country, I just find completely ridiculous and shameful. People say to me, what is going on with your country? And they try and say, you're being overrun by Muslims. And I say, you know what? It's complete crap. We're not being overrun by Muslims. But when they say, but there's been a concerted attack on your free speech, I'm finding it increasingly difficult to argue about that. We have comedians who've been arrested at the airport, Heathrow, coming in for jokes they made on X months before. We now have this. We have people doing Facebook posts being put in prison, grandmothers and so on. And it's got completely out of control. And we've forgotten what free speech actually means. It actually means tolerating opinions that we don't like, not opinions you do like. What now happens? Do you have any right of appeal, Cenk?
So let's talk about the grooming gangs for a second, Piers, because it goes a little deeper than what you said. They told the Times that I denied the existence of grooming gangs. But
you didn't.
Even in the clip you just played,
Yeah, you didn't deny it.
I said, I'm sure that they exist. So that's the exact opposite of what's true. So then that inexorably leads to the question of, why is the British government lying about me? That is very weird, right? Why lie about my stance on grooming gangs? And can I not say that I think it's meant as a distraction and a way to blame Muslims overall?
The whole point is, of course you can. Yeah, I mean, of course you're allowed to have that view. Like I say, I don't agree with it, but I don't agree with a lot of things you say, and I agree passionately with other things you say. And I like having you on the show because you always take part in debate. You're always prepared to debate with people like Shabbos. I mean, I was really pleased, Shabbos, to bring you back in, that you immediately went out there publicly and defended Cenk, the guy you were going to be arguing with passionately about these kind of issues, not realising that he would be at the centre of it. I mean, let me ask you, Shabbos, in terms of this, every country has a right to let anybody in or not let them in, right? America bans a lot of people from going into the country. I happen to know two famous people in England who stopped going to America because they had warnings, like cautions from the police for possessing tiny amounts of marijuana. And that meant every time they tried to go to America, they'd be hauled into a side room when they landed and grilled for 15 hours. And they got fed up with it and they eventually left. And yet Tommy Robinson, who has a list of prison convictions as long as your arm, appears to come and go as he pleases. So there are clearly a weird set of double standards applied about all sorts of stuff. But fundamentally, a country has a right to decide who they let in and who they don't. But you raised a good point, which is after the Tommy Robinson March, it was clear a number of American citizens had been banned from coming in for that because their views were deemed to be likely to, be against the interests of my country. And some of them I kind of agreed with, like Valentina Gomez. I think she's an appalling human being who just wants to whip up racial hatred. But others I didn't get. And so I think, again, it's like, well, who's deciding this? Who is the arbiter? It seems to be just on the whim of the Home Secretary or the Home Office or the Homeland Security people, whatever, to just arbitrarily work out who they think isn't suitable. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I agree with how you diagnosed the problem, and that's why I was comfortable using the word authoritarian, because when you have the government arbitrarily deciding which views we're going to subjectively decide or allow into this country, that's really dangerous. And there are kind of like two ways of entering this. One is the legal lens. So to your point, you are right. Legally, countries can decide who's allowed into the country and who isn't. The United States does it. So Marco Rubio has made it very clear in the beginning of the second Trump administration that we are going to screen people based on their social media presences, if they're in support of terrorist organizations or not. So Tyler Oliveira, he was actually banned from the state of Israel for entering Israel. Whether he should have been banned or not, it's irrelevant because legally Israel can make that decision. I think where I find Cenk's diagnosis of the problem accurate, but his antidote kind of silly, is because, to your point, Piers, Shabana Mahmoud, she is the Home Secretary. This is a Muslim woman who spoke out against Israel for almost all of her political career. The United Kingdom is not a fan of Israel. This is the same country that banned military export licenses, that suspended free trade negotiations, that sanctioned two Israeli ministers. They recognized the state of Palestine against Israel's recommendations without even delineating its borders. They continue to fund the United Nations Relief Works Agency, again, against the wishes of Israel. There are these hate marches every single week. As I said, I have family who live in London. Almost all of them have stopped wearing their yarmulkes. Jews get stabbed in broad daylight. Ambulances are being blown up on Golders Green Road. Jewish cemeteries are regularly defaced. Synagogues are regularly smashed. So this idea that this is the Israel lobby, or this is the Jews exerting their control, A, the United Kingdom, or at least their government, hate Israel, and B, the Jews of the United Kingdom have very little political control in their country. So I think the much broader and better point to make is there is an erosion of free speech. We cannot allow a state centralized government to dictate which views are accepted. And yet, I disagree with Cenk on basically everything, and I would assume, judging by his friend Anna, he disagrees with me on basically everything. But as I said, the only way you can have a civil society, the only way you have a flourishing democracy, is when you go on platforms like the Piers Morgan Show and you talk it out and you air it out.
Right.
Because again, the only way to combat bad ideas is with better ideas. Not saying that certain viewpoints are not allowed. And that's what the Keir Starmer government has been doing. And it's shameful. Cenk should be in London right now.
Cenk, if you were the British Prime Minister, who would you not let in?
Yeah, I love freedom of speech. I'm an American, so I don't even agree with you on Valentina Gomez. So we covered her on the Young Turks, and she's a nutcase. But so what? She's here in America right now, and is everybody going crazy? Has she affected the whole country? No. So she has terrible ideas about how awful Muslims are, and she's terribly bigoted. But so what? So then it's super easy to defeat her in a debate. So look, this isn't about any religions, Jews, Muslims, etc. Everyone in different religions have completely different points of view. To categorize people as thinking a certain way because they're Jewish, for example, or as Valentina does because they're Muslim, is by definition absurd. Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry's is one of the greatest fighters for peace movement in America. He's, adamantly against what the government of Israel is doing. So this generalizations are absurd, but let us deal with it. People that are in media and on shows like this where we discuss things and debate things. But right now, the British government has stepped in and said that some views are not allowed. Well, okay, then you have to elucidate what those views are.
I agree with that.
Are you really banning?
They should
are you really banning the great majority of the world?
Well, I think the problem is not.
That's insane.
Well, the problem, Shabbos, I will let you respond, Shabbos, but the problem is if you don't say precisely why you're banning high-profile people, then obviously the theories will run riot, right? I mean, Cenk doesn't really know. He knows what he's read in the Times. You seem to be incredibly well informed. Well, who informed the Times? The Times shares the building that I do with this studio. So maybe I'll go up and ask them. But, they probably won't tell me. But, the point being, somebody clearly briefed the Times, right, I presume from the Home Office or the government. But what exactly is it that Cenk has said or espoused, which means they had to ban him on public order grounds? I don't understand it.
Well, that's entirely my point. So I want to be clear. It's very possible that Cenk was not allowed into the United Kingdom because of his views on Israel. That's totally possible. But I think the problem I had with you, Cenk, and with your nephew, Hassan Piker, is you immediately went to the conspiratorial, it's because of Israel, it's because of the Jewish lobby, or however you phrased it.
No,
we
they
don't actually know that.
reported it.
It could be, hang on. It could be because, I don't know, you made weird comments about bestiality 10 years ago. It could be because you made weird comments about grooming gangs. I don't know, but you don't know either. And that's kind of my point. We don't know. And I would agree with you. The United Kingdom should actually say, here's what we found demonstrably offensive or whatever it happens to be, because then we could actually say, okay, so at least we know what's within the Overton window of accepted political discourse and fight against that accepted political discourse. But as I said, I think a much stronger argument is the erosion of free speech and not what you immediately did, which is just blame the Israel lobby, which, as I already demonstrated, doesn't make any sense because the Home Secretary, Mahmoud Saban, hates Israel.
No, but brother, I'm not the one saying it. They apparently told the Times, and they listed three things. They listed, but I do know that it's in the article. It's like, so, I mean, you could say that the Times is lying and they made it up.
Yes, the UK government did not explicitly comment on why you were banned. They don't say that.
No, but again, Shabbos, the Times report. The Times is a very authoritative newspaper. It's like the New York Times for the UK. And it published what appeared to be a very well-sourced report very quickly after the news broke, detailing the grounds that the UK government had banned Cenk. And it was largely to do with Israel and also potentially to do with what he'd said about grooming gangs on my show. But given that I've just illustrated that he said the opposite to what was reported in the Times, i.e. he didn't deny that there had been this abuse by the grooming gangs. He was making a wider point about whether it was now being used by the Israeli lobby in some way to distract attention from the Epstein scandal. And that's a different point. It's not about denying whether the abuse ever happened. He didn't. He said the opposite. He said he accepts it probably happened, right? So he wasn't obviously as aware of the case as we are. But I didn't hear him trying to deny it happened. He was making a bigger point about it being used as a distracting tool, which, by the way, I'm sure by some people it is being used that way, as all these things are. But wait, for you, Shabbos, I mean, look, the First Amendment is one of the most powerful defenses of free speech in the world.
Hold on?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. Can I just address the three reasons that the Times put out there, and we missed one, okay? So one was, I said that Israel gives, the Israeli lobby gave more than any other lobby in the last election cycle to Congress. That is an empirically correct statement. So, and by the way, the Times said it was incorrect. So the Times is incorrect, the British government is incorrect, and anybody can verify that. So then the second one was the grooming gangs, where they said I said that they don't exist, and you just showed tape of me saying they exist. So then the British government is lying about that if the Times is correct. And then the third reason that I don't know if it was connected to the British government or the Times just threw it in there as a character assassination was about some blogs that I wrote where I was joking about myself, which they didn't clarify at all. And so then you make, and those are 30 years old. So then you go, okay, wait, is this just a character assassination? Because I've been in the UK so many times since those 30 years
For those who
passed.
didn't see that, what were the jokes?
Yeah, so I'm going to clarify that and the one that Shabbos alluded to. So in a blog I wrote about 28 years ago, I was kidding around about how I couldn't get girls in South Beach and how the genes of poor, women must be poorly designed if I can't get women in South Beach. It was a joke about myself.
Right.
And so, by the way, the New York Times, Times of London, et cetera, have never clarified that it's a joke. And it's an abomination that they mislead people like that. And then Shabbos just talked about bestiality. Now, that was another joke from a video where they edited it so they cut out me saying the horse wouldn't say nay, and everybody in the studio laughs. And so since they cut that out, they have been smearing me with that for literally a decade straight. But again, I didn't get banned from coming into the UK all of those years. These are all attempts at character assassination ex post facto. So now that makes it even worse, because why did the British government lie about me? What is it about? And they did say it was over criticism of Israel. So if they don't clarify, they're just sending out an advertisement to the world. Don't come to the United Kingdom. We will ban you. We won't even tell you why we ban you, other than the fact that generically we don't like your opinions of Israel. And Shabbos can say that it's absurd, except that's literally the only thing that they have said to the newspapers as to why I was banned.
From the state of Israel for entering Israel. Whether he should have been banned or not, it's irrelevant, because legally Israel can make that decision. I think where I find Cenk's diagnosis of the problem accurate, but his antidote kind of silly, is because, to your point, Piers, Shabana Mahmood, she is the Home Secretary. This is a Muslim woman who spoke out against Israel for almost all of her political career. Its borders, they continue to fund the United Nations Relief Works Agency, again, against the wishes of Israel. There are these hate marches every single week. As I said, I have family who live in London. Almost all of them have stopped wearing their yarmulkes. Jews get stabbed in broad daylight. Ambulances are being blown up on Golders Green Road. Jewish cemeteries are regularly defaced. Synagogues are regularly smashed. So this idea that of free speech, we cannot allow a state centralized government to dictate which views are accepted. And yet, I disagree with Cenk on basically everything. And I would assume, judging by his friend Anna, he disagrees with me on basically everything. But as I said, the only way you can have a civil society, the only way you have a flourishing democracy, is when you go on platforms like the Piers Morgan Show and you talk, and it's shameful. Cenk should be in London right now.
Cenk, if you were the British Prime Minister, who would you not let in?
What I can tell you is this. When a government bans
I love freedom of speech. I'm an American, so I don't. Has she affected the whole country? No. So she has terrible ideas about how awful Muslims are, and she's terribly bigoted. But so what? So then it's super easy to defeat her in a debate. So look, this isn't about any religions, Jews, Muslims, etc. Everyone in different religions have completely different